This is TrepWire Week in Review for week ending February 12th. I'm Martha Kocher with Trep, a data modeling and analytics firm for the CMBS commercial real estate and CLO markets. I'm with Manus Clancy, Senior Managing Director, and Joe McBride, Head of CRE Finance. This week, the number of COVID cases is the lowest since last November, and the administration has boosted the number of vaccines sent to states. This is resulting in some easing of restrictions. In economic data, the consumer price index for January inched up, driven by gas prices. New jobless claims dipped slightly, but were worse than estimates. And Fed Chair Powell said interest rates would remain unchanged, citing that the real unemployment rate is dramatically understated. Manos, let's get right into the office sector and some of the problems that we're seeing cropping up there.
Thanks, Martha. Your intro, I think, kind of underscored what a lot of us are seeing on the broader picture, right? It's kind of barbelled. You have positive things to look at and negative things to look at, right? On the positive side, stimulus is moving along the process. COVID cases are down. On the negative side, unemployment filings, remain really, really stubbornly high. So if you're naturally bullish, there's, stories out there for you. If you're naturally bearish, there's stuff out there for you as well if you're looking at various news sources. And I think that theme kind of extends to commercial real estate right now as well. And it just seems like the office is turning a corner, and it's not turning the corner onto the yellow brick road. It's turning the corner onto a dark alley. And that dark alley is the sublet space. And we've talked about it before, but we're really seeing a lot of huge swaths of space, and the pace of what's coming to the market just doesn't seem to be slowing down.
So every day, it seems, I read another news story about a company that has decided to go to a hybrid office work from home model when they do return. And it was Salesforce this week who had announced that they're going to be doing something like that. The 9 to 5 is dead. And as part of that whole hybrid reshift of how people work, they're going to be reducing their office space. So I think this fantasy of more square foot per person in the office, and even though we're going to be working from home 2 days a week, we're still going to need that much space, is fantasy. And we're really starting to see it play out. Again, I've said it over and over again, but I'll say it again for all the new listeners. Every CFO at home who's sitting there looking at how much rent they're paying and how productive their company is while they're not in the office is going to be really doing that math to say, well, maybe we're 5% less productive or 10% less productive when we're not in the office, but our office costs are way more than 10 or 15% of our operating expense. So there's definitely going to be a shift there.
Well, before we get into some city by city numbers, a big story this week, to Joe's point, or maybe expanding upon Joe's point, is that publisher Condé Nast announced it had withheld $2.4 million in rent from its lease at One World Trade Center. So when you talk about this issue, there's the one side of it, which is people can say they're taking up less space, but they're still on the hook for their lease, right? They're going to sublet it. They're subletting space, adds to market inventory. It drives down prices. It also reduces the flow of traffic in the city for restaurants and bars and so forth. So that's one problem that we have. But the other problem that cropped up this week with Condé Nast is, what if these people start saying, we're not paying? In their case, I think they have 1.2 million square feet at One World Trade Center. They used to be in Times Square. They split a building with Skadden Arps, the law firm. It was a Durst building where they were located. They moved downtown, took 1.2 million square feet. Not long after they took it, they had already sublet 150,000 square feet. Now they're looking to take 400,000 square feet in Jersey City and get out of some of their obligations at One World Trade. The property is owned by the Port Authority. It's co-owned by the Port Authority of New York and the Port Authority of New Jersey. But this is a really concerning twist, that you have somebody on the hook for rent and saying, we're withholding this for whatever reason. We want to give back space. We want to terminate, whatever the case may be. This would be the start of a really worrisome trend.
So one of our podcast listeners I was talking to this week, and she told this story about how her and her friend had this is kind of an analogy of what you're talking about, Madison. Someday I'll get to the point here. when their lease came up for renewal, their apartment lease, the landlord asked them for an additional like $250 a month or something, like a pretty decent increase. And they said that, it's COVID, we're in Manhattan, this is crazy, it's too expensive. And they ended up leaving that space. When they left, they turned around and looked on Zillow, and the landlord had dropped the rent by $1,500 on the apartment. And it's like a decent apartment, So what I was saying is that had she realized the leverage she had in that situation, she could have said, what are you, crazy? I'm not paying more. I want to pay less. I'll pay you, $500 less than I'm paying now, and you'll still have a tenant, as opposed to me leaving and you putting this thing up on the market for $1,000 less. So that's like the very micro version of this same story, which is the tenants have all the leverage at this point.
Well,
right?
The other thing about it is, the tenant underplayed their hand, but the owner of the building overplayed their hand.
Right.
That's a little crazy.
Right.
And, that's the way you start seeing a building go from 95% to 60% because of silly decisions like that, when you can, kind of keep one in the hand when you have it.
Well, that's also, I would just say, this is something that we don't track as much, but the Newmarks of the world and the other kind of leasing brokers of the world track this stuff. But the top line rental rate is not the real number, right? Because you have free rent, you have concessions, you have TI, right? All those different things. So most building owners want to maintain that top line number, so that they can put that at the top of their pro forma when they're going for a refinance on a loan or going to sell the property. Digging deeper, if you look at the amount of concessions that are being offered on all sorts of real estate, but especially office and multifamily in these big cities, it's kind of astounding the amount of concessions that are being offered in order to get new tenants locked in.
So going back to the market by market stuff, just to give a sense of what's kind of keeping me up at night. I hope this doesn't sound like the radio guy giving baseball or college football scores, because I'm going to run through a lot of stuff very, very quickly. But
10-10 wins.
Right, the Saturday afternoon football.
What is it?
Scores.
You give us 10 minutes, we'll give you the world.
That's right. So let's start looking at New York. This is just new this week. Ralph Lauren wants to reduce their square footage by 30%. They have a huge parcel at 650 Madison Avenue. It backs a single asset deal. Their lease comes up in 2024. They recently opened up a new headquarters out in New Jersey. So in New York, you can add Ralph Lauren. They're not subletting now, but they will have that space coming up before too long. You could add them to Yelp, Knotel, WeWork, PwC, Dentsu, S&P, and others that have already flagged this. And in fact, if you look at the real deal, I think this came out about a month ago, there's 7 sublet parcels available, which would not include Ralph Lauren, of over 100,000 square feet, and 11 between 50 and 100. So when you add that all up, and then you throw in on top of that the sheer amount of space that's come on in Hudson Yards.
I was just going to say 3 million square feet in Hudson Yards too.
Right. I mean, that's just an awful lot of space. And I am a believer that when you put something online for subletting, your decision's final, right? You're not mamby-pamby anymore. You're not saying, I might do this, I might do that. When you give this to a broker to say, we want to start shopping this, you've made that decision that you're going to reduce your footprint by 25, 50, 60%, whatever it is. Moving on to some other cities, that came out with news this week. I do think, I hate to say this, I think ground zero on the office problem will be Chicago. This week, Uber, another 150,000 square feet at the old post office. Experian out in Schaumburg, a suburb out on, I guess it's I-90, 180,000 square feet they're going to give up. This is on top of Yelp, looking to shed 30%, United Airlines, hundreds of thousands of square feet, Facebook, 100,000 square feet, PayPal, 40,000, Capital One, 165, the Chicago Tribune, I don't have a number there. TTX was a freight operator, 100,000 square feet. Cars.com, 52,000 square feet. Groupon, 150,000 square feet. Suntory, which makes Jim Beam 100,000 square feet.
These are all subleases, or they're
in the United
also...
Airlines case, they're in the
leaving.
Willis Tower, and they will look to be giving stuff back. I think their lease ends fairly soon, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure of that. But the rest of these are bona fide news stories where the space has been offered since like September 1st. And two of those, like I said, were new this week, Experian and Uber. In San Francisco, you talked about Salesforce, Joe, before. They have hundreds of thousands of square feet in that space. They just took over the Salesforce Tower there. Previously, Yelp, 112,000 square feet. Twitter, 104. Oracle, Dropbox, Charles Schwab, and Uber. By the way, Wolf Street, who covers some of this stuff, they were the ones that keep a nice list of what's out there. I want to give them credit where it's due. New this week, in addition to Salesforce, Optimizely, which is a startup. They're closing their headquarters at 631 Howard Street. They were acquired. A little bit more alarming, Old Navy closing its San Francisco headquarters. It's moving in with the Gap, which in COVID times sounds a little bit like moving back in with your parents, right? They're going to give up their space in downtown. So 3 big cities, lots of space coming due. I can continue, but I won't. Portland, Seattle, and others. It's a problem. And when you throw in that Condé Nast news, it's really glass half empty at the moment.
Remember at the very beginning of this podcast, we used to say the haves and the have-nots. They're the have-nottiest at this point.
Yes. I will point out that Moody's came out with a report today. No full recovery to pre-pandemic rent levels until 2026. On the more positive side, we did report in Trupwire this week. We saw renewals and expansions in Cincinnati, Phoenix, and in New York City. So not all bad news, but enough that if you're somebody looking for space, you're just in the catbird seat right now. And if you're a landlord with an expiring lease, it's perilous times.
That's why they're saying that the office carnage, if there is going to be carnage, is going to be bumpy and slow.
For those that haven't left the podcast to go grab a bottle of spirits at this point, I will say that the deal of the week this week is Denver office. So I will have a green shoot there later. And as far as Manhattan goes, I'm very happy to follow up with news reports that MSG will be opening Madison Square Garden over the next week or two for 10% of their audience. So about 2,000 people can go to concerts, hoops games,
and Rangers games,
hockey
most
games.
importantly.
My advice to Jim Dolan, since you only have 2,000 seats to divvy out, I'd be booking Smash Mouth and not Taylor Swift.
Maybe JD and the Straight Shots will play. That's a really inside joke for New York Knicks and Rangers fans. So
Yes.
Anybody who is a fan of JD and the Straight Shots should reach out to podcast@trep.com.
You'll get a few. Let's look at hotels. We have a number of good news items there.
Yeah, it was, mostly negative on the office side, but I do have some signs of life on the hotel side, 3 different ones. I'll start off with the Hilton Garden Inn in Lake Oswego. The story came from the Portland Business Journal. The property is a 179 key limited service hotel in the Portland MSA. The property was built in 2000, renovated in 2015, valued at $39.4 million in 2015. It backs a $24 million CMBS loan. The loan was slated to mature last month. The loan was not paid off on time. A trio of buyers have come in and acquired the property. The price was not disclosed. So we'll be looking for that when this loan gets resolved, either with the February remittance or the March remittance, and perhaps the price will be disappointing. But I'd rather look on the positive side of this, which is any sale is a good sale. For a while, there was no bid on hotels, and now we're starting to see bids, and I think that's terrific. The loan for the trailing 12 months ending in June 2020, 0.89x occupancy, 58%. For me, the big data point on this whole thing is, hopefully this is indicative of buyers trying to take a position ahead of the recovery. So good story there. Second story, I think maybe even better. The New York LaGuardia Airport Marriott, and this is a story from Cranes, a 443 key full service hotel was acquired. The purchase price wasn't fully disclosed, but the Cranes article said that it was somewhere between $100 million and $200 million, which is an awfully wide range, of course. If you were to use either side of that bell, that barbell, it would either be $225,000 a key or $450,000 a key. So for those looking for data points for how should I value my hotel, that's helpful. The positive sign about this, though, is if you look at recent valuations of hotels, and by recent, it's not that recent, it's stuff between 2015 and 2017. The Holiday Inn in LaGuardia, the valuation $278,000 per room. Crown Plaza JFK, $190,000 per room in 2017. The JFK Hilton, $290,000 per room. That was a little bit older, 2013. So even at the low end of this selling price for the LaGuardia Airport Marriott of, if it's as low as $225,000 per key, that stacks up fairly well to where things were over the last 5 years. It's not, 10 cents on the dollar type price. And this is an airport hotel. And, that's been a really heavily hit market. And so I think that's a real positive sign. The seller was Rubicon Companies. They were rep by JLL, buyer ASAP Holdings. So that's number two. I'll give you number three. Do we want number three?
Let's hear it.
This is from the Pittsburgh Business Journal. Tim Schooley, who gives us some good reporting frequently with that publication. The DoubleTree by Hilton, Pittsburgh, Monroeville Convention Center Hotel. That's some big name for a hotel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words in the name of that hotel. It's near the Monroeville Mall. It's a full service property in that area. Sold for what appears to be a fairly low price, $5.25 million, $27,000 per room. Again, this is a part of the market that has been really, really hammered, right? A convention center near a mall gets sold. And so again, I want to look at the glass half full and say, here's something that got a bid, right? We may not think it's a great bid, but it's a bid nonetheless, and it may mean the market is starting to open.
Well, I think the thesis is that other than hotels that rely on significant international travel, you would think that these would be the quickest things to snap back if the economy snaps back like we hope it does. Right?
Well, I'm hoping that that's the case. I'm hoping that these sales are indicative of people saying the recovery is now 90 days away, and let's buy this thing up before it goes up another 20% in price.
Yeah, and I would say if there's any, if the conversations that we at TREP are having kind of on a daily basis with clients and prospects and just the outside world are any indication, there is a significant bid for hotel at this point. Or I shouldn't say bid, I should say there's a significant interest in deploying capital in the hotel space at this point. So I don't know if the fact that we haven't seen as many transactions is because the owners were holding out and waiting and getting forbearance and able to hold out. But I do think that, there's a floor under these asset prices, as long as you're not, totally 100% international travel oriented or 100% business travel oriented.
Yeah, I think that we'll be looking very carefully at the remittance reports in February and March. Remittance season really starts tomorrow, February 12th, and we'll be looking for loans that get paid off, loans that get DPO'd, backed by hotels.
Discounted payoff.
Right. Loans that are resolved with losses. I think it'll be a very interesting month or two, because I think you get that lull in December and early January where transactions don't take place. Now it feels like we're back in the saddle again. Things are happening. And it wouldn't surprise me to see some meaningful data points come through over the next 6 weeks.
I wonder if some of this is due to COVID in another way, which is if you're going to be the bidder on a property of any sort of size, you probably want to go see that property. And, do a site visit, do your due diligence, all that type of stuff. And I know that there's tons of investors out there who are putting their mask on and taking the flight out to a property. But I bet you that entire environment or ecosystem of traveling to go see properties, doing tours, like all that type of stuff is significantly down, which is just friction on the entire machine. So that's an aspect of this we never really talk about, but it's kind of like the human side of all of these things.
Turning to retail news.
I never really thought of this before, but this could be the salvation of the shopping mall. This is a story from the Times Herald Record in upstate New York. It's from the Catskills area. If you've ever seen Dirty Dancing, you'll know what we're talking about, although that represents a very different time in our country. The story is Resorts World plans to open a gambling hall with electronic games in the Newburgh Mall. That property once backed a $31 million loan. It suffered a $28 million loss in 2017, represented 88% of the loan balance. The gambling hall will take over 70,000 square feet that used to be occupied by Bonton. And, we've been talking about this for a long time, right? Repositioning these things as multifamily, which is very expensive, corporate headquarters, expensive, distribution centers, which not that expensive, but also not that lucrative because there's so much competition in there. Here is a situation that if you could find 50 malls and you could put, a 70,000 square foot casino, you're off to the races. I used to drive on the LIE frequently and often would pass Jake's 58, which is a casino on the Long Island Expressway. And even during COVID times, that parking lot was full every single day. I don't know how they skirted the rules and, how they remained open all the time. But, it didn't matter if you were going by at 7 a.m., 2 in the afternoon, or 11 at night. That thing was full. And, this could just be the thing that takes these guys and makes them relevant again.
There is the idea that sports betting is also becoming legal in more and more states. Combine the casino element with the sports book element, then you get into some real. So let me just say, I am all for capitalism and I am all for people investing in assets and trying to make money. But I have never been to a casino or an area around a casino that was a nice place to be. I don't love the idea of putting casinos all over the place. It just seems, not so good.
I don't know this to be a fact, and I'm really going on memory, but I remember when the one opened up in Yonkers where they have the trotters and the pacers, right? The harness racing. Somebody said that the boon that was to the city of Yonkers was just so extraordinary. So maybe if you're a mall guy, who cares if you got guys in bathrobes with cigars and a racing form, right? If you're generating $100,000 a month in VIG,
right?
You're back in the game.
Like I said, I'm all for capitalism and all for people making money any way that they can that's legal. But I wish there was a better way.
While we're speaking of wagering, I wanted to take a moment to apologize for my absolutely abysmal Super Bowl pick last week.
I wanted to say you're welcome for my and Martha's very great Super Bowl pick last week.
All I know is that everything that I thought the Chiefs were going to do to the Bucks, the Bucks did to the Chiefs.
That's right.
And I certainly hope nobody took my tout and bet the farm on it. But if you did lose any money on this and you were listening to me for advice, let me know and we'll send you a Tripwire t-shirt to ease your pain.
Are you going to be the guy next year that goes to the Super Bowl and bets $50,000 on the prop bet that there will be a streaker? And then you just go streak?
The streaker. Did you hear the radio play-by-play of that?
Kevin Harlan's radio play-by-play of that was unbelievable.
Oh, my God.
You all should check it out if you haven't heard
Man,
it. Kevin Harlan's one of the best play-by-play guys. Pull up your pants, man.
Yes, that was wonderful. I do know a guy that took the Bucks last year before they signed Brady at 40-1 to win the Super Bowl. So
wow.
A listener, in fact. Well, in any event, I'm going back to my typical thing, which is regardless of who's playing, I am picking the Giants to win the Super Bowl.
Good luck
That's
with
right.
that.
With Russell Wilson as our quarterback.
Let's go back to some more retail stuff.
Yeah,
A couple of things that we're also looking at. Number one, we saw Simon. I know Joe will talk about Simon's earnings shortly. They filed a suit to keep Ascena Retail Group from closing more stores and from weakening its master lease agreement. Ascena, which owns Ann Taylor, The Loft, and others, they went Chapter 11 in July, bought out by an affiliate of Sycamore, which is a PE firm. And to kind of weave this back into the office thing and Condé Nast before, and now this, in addition to everything else, there's this fear that we spend the next 5 years just litigating against each other, right? Which doesn't sell
move the ball
anything
forward.
right? There's no new revenue there, and all it does is drive up the bottom cost line, and that's just a real concern.
Yeah, so I have to give a plug for I don't think it's a very well-known app, but the app is just called Earnings Calls. We actually used to do this for the REIT space. We used to record the REIT's earnings calls and put them up on a website that no longer exists. But these guys, they pull down all the earnings calls that they can find across all the investor relations websites. They put it in one app and you can listen to it on your phone like a podcast. So it's actually really useful. So you could do it in between the 750 Zoom calls you have to be on every day. You can listen to these earnings calls on your phone. So I was listening to the Simon one. David Simon's a real fun listen. He really sounds like a guy who, started the company and owns the company and can kind of do whatever he wants. So he's kind of a little bit like Barry Stern, like on the call. He's kind of shoots from the hip, but is honest and open. So it's cool. So some of the highlights: Simon was able to collect 90% of its rent that it was due from Q2 through Q4. So that number is much higher than it was a quarter ago and 2 quarters ago, because a lot of the rent that was behind, they've been able to kind of work out and get paid on. They said most of their rent abatements, their big rent abatement deals that they had struck, had been kind of lived their life and have been put back into regular rental payments. They said they had a few big ones that they're still working through, but that 90% number was I would say much better than I would have expected. Their occupancy across the board is at about 91%, which is down from 95% at the end of 2019. So again, I mean, these are longer term leases. So you wouldn't see like a drastic decline, kind of similar to the office space. You don't see a drastic decline right away. I would say one thing that they mentioned, you mentioned Ascena, Manus. We've been talking about how Simon has purchased some retailers, right? Brooks Brothers, Forever 21, and a couple of others. And they were really, I would say, I wouldn't call it bullish, but I think that they were trying to make the case that they really got some diamonds in the rough here. They were able to buy some assets at very discounted prices that generate a lot of revenue and a lot of EBITDA, right? So they were going through the earnings EBITDA. I call it EBITDA. Some people say like EBITDA or something, like Ibiza. But anyway, they were able to generate almost like a 50% return on investment on an EBITDA basis on those retailers that they had purchased, because they were able to purchase them for such low prices. So he gave a big shout out to Forever 21, who apparently has done a really nice job in e-commerce sales. They also mentioned that their portfolio of retailers that they own generates something like north of $3 billion of revenue online. So, if you were to take that as at face value and kind of just value that revenue stream from an online channel, they would probably get a much, much higher valuation if they were a tech company. So a couple of the other points here, I'll just say, hopefully I'm not sounding like 10-10 wins. Their NOI was down quarter over quarter, was down 26% on their domestic properties, which is a pretty big drop. A lot of that was due to percentage sales that was a lot lower this year. And overall, year over year, they were down 17% on NOI. So actually, that's like Manus is always talking about numbers to use as a guideline for valuing things in a land where there aren't a lot of transactions. I think that NOI drop number is probably a reasonable guideline to be using if you're looking to mark to market, retail mall type properties.
In the land with no anchors, the man with a Nordstrom is king, right? Is that what we're saying? So, we talked last week about Brookfield during their earnings call, saying that they had about 20 properties that were about, in terms of valuation, about equal to their loan balance. And those would be the kind of properties that you would expect to be really cuspy. Brookfield may keep them, or they may toss back the keys. What did Simon have to say about that, Joe, on their earnings call?
It's funny that you mentioned that. There was an interesting back and forth in the Q&A where there was a question from an analyst about some of their debt yield and kind of leverage ratios. And, David Simon came back and basically said, you got to be very careful with these ratios. You have to realize that a lot of our debt, or a lot of our properties have non-recourse debt on them, and that will overstate leverage, which is an interesting thing to say because it's kind of a way of saying, like, we don't really count that stuff as debt in our minds. You know what I mean? So it's the idea is that if it's non-recourse, they can hand over the keys and walk away. So they don't really, they see that as a very real option, right? That jingle mail option. As far as I saw, they didn't mention any sort of kind of updated, how many properties are underwater or at the money in the earnings call, as far as I saw.
And lastly, in industrial, we saw some news from Amazon.
Yeah, this kind of falls into the category of fly in the ointment. Condé Nast was in that category with them rejecting their or not making their lease payment. When we talk about the offices, it's the sublet space. When you talk about retail, it's lawsuits between retailers and property owners and stuff like that. The fly in the ointment on the industrial side this week was the big union forthcoming vote about whether or not to unionize a distribution plant in Alabama that is, run for Amazon. And that's interesting to see. You could look at this one of two ways, or maybe even more than two ways. On the one hand, you could see a situation where Amazon, because they're so deep pocketed, can afford to pay these types of things, but smaller industrial operators can't, and they become even more dominant in this. Although, to be sure, Amazon has been fighting this tooth and nail. On the other part of it, you could also see kind of redistribution of distribution centers, right? If there's certain areas that become heavily unionized and employers don't want to do this. We've seen this in the upper Midwest, in the Pacific Northwest, firms leaving because they feel like they want to go to non-union areas. That could be an issue too. And then you see the cost side. Is this going to drive up the costs for these e-operators at a time when people are talking about taxing them more heavily and so forth?
It kind of makes me think about the idea of the Walmarts and Targets of the world. Like, they already have the last mile distribution center. It's their store. So, and they're already paying their employees decent wages there. And like, I think this gives them a little bit of a, if this goes through and if it actually hampers Amazon, which I don't think anything can hamper Amazon at this point, they're too big. But it at least gives them, a fighting chance here against the big, I was going to say the big Jeff Bezos, but now it's a new guy coming up soon. Andy Jassy, I think his name is.
And we have a question from a listener that wanted to know, why do some CMBS, their new CMBS deals, price tighter than others? And Manus, you'll walk us through that by comparing a couple of deals.
Yes, thank you for the question. We often talk about spread ranges and spread levels. We try to do this once a month. A prior question came in 3 or 4 months ago with somebody asking us to update this periodically. And so every month we try to talk about where spreads are. And at the time, we will say something like AAA spreads are between 75 basis points over the curve and 85 basis points over the curve. So this listener came back and asked, why is it such a big range for something that's rated AAA? And so I'm going to use this as an example. We'll call this an educational segment to compare two deals that were brought to market in December. One was from the bank shelf. A shelf is a registration under which an issuer will come out with a series of CMBS deals. This is under the bank shelf. The deal came to market in, as I said, December. It had subordination levels of 30% for the AAA, 15.6% for the AA, 11.6% for the single A, and 6.875 for the BBB minus. Its spread, its AAA spread, was 74 basis points over the curve. Its AA 125, its single A 190. It had a weighted average LTV of 50 and a weighted average debt service coverage ratio of 2.77x. So this we would call a very conservatively underwritten deal. Really low LTV, really high DSCR. The borrower was, quote unquote, rewarded two ways. Number one is they got rewarded with a lower spread, lower cost of funding. And they were rewarded because when you'll see the percentage of bonds that they had to make BBB minus and lower, which are your highest yielding costs of funds, was smaller than the other deal I am going to tell you about. The other deal was a Wells Fargo deal. It also had 30% AAA subordination level, but at the AA level, 17% versus 15.6% for the other deal. Single A, 14% subordination versus 11.6. BBB minus, 7.6 versus 6.8. So much more protection offered to the AAA buyer, which drives your cost up. Their spreads to the AAA S plus 85, to the AA 145 over the curve, to the single A minus 225. So the Wells Fargo paid 11 basis points more in spread at the AAA, 20 basis points more at the AA, and 35 basis points at the single A. Because of this, and the reason for that is their weighted average LTV was 60 versus 50 for the other deal. And their debt service coverage ratio was 2.33 versus 2.77. So you ask yourself, why would anybody take the Wells Fargo path? Why would anybody have a higher cost of funding than somebody else? And the reason for this can be seen in the coupon. The weighted average coupon that you saw for the bank deal, the first deal, the more conservatively arranged deal, 3.10%. For the Wells Fargo deal, almost 3.8%. So in return for taking on higher costs to sell their bonds and higher subordination levels, they got 70 basis points in spread. Now, there is no right answer to this. What this is telling us is that there's two niches. The guys that run the bank shelf run a very conservative niche. They are guys looking for borrowers that want low leverage or willing to take low leverage, are not valuing proceeds enormously, and are okay taking a conservative package. Wells Fargo and their shelf are open to more liberal underwriting, higher LTVs, lower debt service coverage ratios, and more proceeds. Anytime you see a higher LTV, it means more proceeds for the borrower. So that's the answer to that question. Different banks have different strategies. They all try to find a niche which serves a different part of the market, and that's why these deals never look alike.
Yeah, and I'll throw in a couple of wrinkles here. I mean, there's no way to answer this question on a podcast, right? To truly fully answer this question, because it comes down to an amalgamation of 100 different variables, including the distribution of property types, right? I noticed that the Wells Fargo deal has almost 10% lodging versus the bank deal has 4%. Right? The spreads that were in the bond market at the time the loans were originated, which could be 30 days or 60 days or 90 days previous, right? How many loans are in one of these issuers' warehouse at the time? So basically, there's all sorts of structuring nuance to how loans get into deals and how they're priced and how the proceeds are paid out. But also, the other thing to mention, Manus, I think, is the way that these guys make money is the difference between the weighted average coupon on the loans and the weighted average yield that they sell the bonds at, right? So whereas the spreads might be slightly wider, aka the yields are higher, aka the price is lower. Can you follow me on the Wells Fargo deal? But we don't necessarily know, without doing some more math, what the ultimate proceeds of the deal for the issuer were. So if the spread between the weighted average coupon on the loans and the weighted average yield on the bonds is larger than in the Wells Fargo deal, then they're happy, right? So I don't know. There's a lot of nuance there and a lot of stuff to talk about. Someday, Manus, you'll have to tell us the old stories of, modeling, mortgage pass-throughs and tax-exempt bond stuff in DOS prompts back in the 80s.
Right, with deck writers and tearing the pages off the ends, with the circle dots at the end.
That's right.
Yes, we'll go through that at some point. But the bottom line is, just because bank had a lower cost of funds at Wells Fargo, to Joe's point, is it doesn't mean that they had more profit than Wells Fargo. Right. Wells Fargo could have been the more profitable deal when you add this all up. You just don't know. The point being that different banks have different strategies. Those strategies serve different types of customers, and it results in different deals being looked at differently by investors in the primary market and then also in the secondary market as these deals age.
We're releasing our life insurance commercial mortgage return index for Q4. Joe, give us a quick highlight of what that showed.
The headline here is, stability and signs of slow return to growth. Lifeco loans. Now, this is a thing called Life Comps. It's an index that tracks the loan price and income performance of commercial real estate loans held on insurance balance sheets. We actually have a bunch of interest in this right now from both insurance companies and asset managers who are looking at benchmark performance. But anyway, I digress. In the fourth quarter, LifeComps posted a positive 1.22% total return, a slight decrease from the positive 1.71% in the third quarter. I'm just reading this right. The volatility in valuations caused by the pandemic appears to have receded, with returns stabilizing for the second consecutive quarter. Income contributed about 1% and appreciation contributed about 20 basis points to the return metric there. So there are still some credit concerns in the data and mentioned by the lenders in the consortium, but definitely check that out.
Yes. And shout outs, before I get into those, we have a couple of programming notes. Next week, Manus, you will be presenting at a webinar if you want to go over that.
Sure. It's hosted by Jeffer Mangel, Butler and Mitchell, LLP. They go by JMBM, and they're going to be hosting a conversation about the status of the lending markets, heavily focused on special servicers. Other guests will be Argentic, Greystone, Citus, and Manhattan Hospitality. So it's a really great panel. If you would like to get the registration link, feel free to email us and we will send it over. I think it's taking place on Thursday, the 18th.
And similarly, on the 18th, Tom Fink, who's on the advisory board for the Fordham Real Estate Institute, sent us information about an upcoming webinar that they're hosting, What's Next for the Major Sectors of Commercial Real Estate. If you're interested in that, it is also a free webinar, and we'll send you the link if you want to check it out. Shout outs, we have Kurt from CBRE who wanted us to do some deep dive on retail, which we'll be doing. James B, Joni M, Steel City Dave loved our discussion with MBA that we did this week. You should check it out. We talked about policies that are upcoming with the new administration. Scott B mentioned us on LinkedIn. Tommy C also gave us a shout out on LinkedIn. And Vivek, who we had on the pod last week, his mom said she's a big fan of that episode. Surprising.
I want to give a shout out as well. This is kind of consistent with something I did about 3 or 4 weeks ago and on topic with something I try to do at least once a month. To the healthcare workers of South Carolina, I took my dad for his second shot last week. They're processing what appears to me to be about 600 people per hour. There's tons of people over 80, and obviously that's the demographic of people that could get sick if you're cutting corners and not keeping the place clean. This has the potential to be like a 1930s overstuffed couch filled with wood shavings and a drowsy smoker, right? If you don't get this right. And there's people there, cleaning the seats, cleaning the pens, cleaning the clipboards, and patiently just, processing people that really don't move very quickly through this process that's tricky. And, a real tip of the cap goes to all the people that did this all so pleasantly. The funny thing is, I'll digress for just a moment. I told people after last time, my father felt like he needed a reward, right? He did a good deed and he demanded Bojangles and the bow rounds and everything. And this time he wanted to go in a different direction. He said, we're going to do Dunkin' Donuts. It's quite funny. And he said, I want a couple of Dunkin' Donuts. I said, what kind do you want? He goes, oh, anything. It doesn't matter. Bavarian cream? No, nobody likes Bavarian cream. Those are disgusting.
He's
and
right about that, by the way.
They're disgusting. But anyway, there's a long pause and he starts talking again. And he says, sometimes when you get to be my age, you look back on some of your mistakes. And I'm expecting something really profound at this moment. We had a wonderful 3 weeks, the longest time we spent together in 3 decades, right? 3 weeks together with your dad. And he says, I once went to Dunkin' Donuts and I ordered the tuna fish. And he kind of floored me with that one. I didn't see that coming. And that was one of his life regrets.
That
I have
sounds
similar regrets.
non
The
sequitur.
taquito that's been spinning on the hot rollers in 7-Eleven for 12 hours, the gas station sushi. Sometimes you just got to live on the edge.
The one that got me was seeing how they make the egg sandwiches at Dunkin' Donuts. The eggs are in a box. They're already pre-cooked, and they're pulled out of the box with like forceps or a tweezer and thrown on the sandwich. It is repulsive.
McDonald's does it better because they do that stuff in the back where you can't really see.
We will never, ever have Dunkin' Donuts as an advertiser after that.
I'm sure you all know this, you loyal listeners out there, I spent probably 3 years of my life studying in Dunkin' Donuts, both for college, for MBA, for CFA, all that stuff. And it was always a lot of fun. So Dunkin', we're still open to having you on as an advertiser.
Dunkin's one of my favorite coffees. Sorry. Before we close, let's hear what the deal of the week is, Manus.
We promised it earlier today that we would talk positively about office because we gave a lot of negative warning signs about that segment. This one here is a Denver story. Miller Global and principal real estate investors have acquired a 300,000 square foot office in the Denver Tech Center. Purchase price $74.3 million, so a big number. The seller was MetLife. They were repped by Peter Marion of JLL. JLL also arranged an acquisition loan from Mesa West.
And if you haven't noticed, this weekend is Valentine's Day, but it seems that nearly half of couples say they're planning to skip spending money on their beloved this year.
Probably the male half.
It's well, actually, you're right. It is mostly men and younger men that say they're going to skip it.
Valentine's Day was one of the biggest dilemma days of the year.
It's a trap.
Well, for me, it wasn't a trap. It was, well, I was always very late to the train. I would always look at my watch 5 minutes later than I should. I couldn't walk to the train. I'd be jogging to the train. You get on the train, you don't stop sweating until you get to 125th Street. And, that's kind of my life. And I hated that part of it. But on Valentine's Day, it took a whole nother level of, moral dilemma. You've promised your wife that you'll give your kids the bath, right? And you'll take care of everything. It's your night. You can watch This Is Us or whatever it is. But you also promised to bring a nice bottle of wine home. And you got 9 minutes to make the train. and so you're sitting there saying, do I stop and get the wine and miss this train?
Get the wine.
But I also miss the bath. Or do I forget the wine and do I get the train and do the bath? Either way, you've blown it already. And, usually I would stop, I'd get the wine and hope that my wife thought it was a delayed train, which Metro North is known for.
I'm envisioning like a really good commercial. I don't know what it's for, but it's Manus ducking and diving down Madison Avenue, going around people. And the flower guy who's always there on Valentine's Day and Secretary's Day and everything else, he sees Manis running and gives him the nod, right? He goes, "You need one," and Manis gives him the thumbs up, and it's like a handoff in football as he runs by and gets it, and then he comes home to
As a
happy
hero.
wife.
He's a hero.
I'm not ashamed to say that I once threw myself on the window where the conductor sits and pleaded with him to open the door. Please, please, please open the door, like rubbing my nose against the thing. And I'd never seen the guy open the door for anybody. And I don't know if I looked desperate or maniacal or what, but he opened the door for me and we had a happy Valentine's Day.
Listen,
Amen.
I was once, this is the last digression, then we'll close, I promise. I was once at 125th Street holding the door for 5 of my friends or from school who were getting back on the train to go home from basketball practice. I held the door for like a good 30 seconds, like to the point where they were trying to close it for a while. A few minutes later, the conductor walks up and there's 5 of us standing around in the vestibule, and he looks around, he looks down at the floor, he looks around at everybody, and he points at my shoes. And he goes, "You were the one," because he could see my gray New Balance sticking out of the train. And he started like reaming me out about it. But anyway, I thought that was good ingenuity from the conductor guy.
Detective work. With that, we'll close. And thanks to our producer, Haley Keene. Join us next week as we discuss what's happened during the week and how it may be impacting you. If you have a question or a comment, send us an email at podcast@trep.com. For more info, visit trep.com and subscribe to the podcast with your favorite provider. Thank you for listening and stay well.
All right.